week 10 of the fantasy football season, and here's the top 12 kickers I'm ranking heading into the week. The first guy, Tyler Bass of the Buffalo Bills. So Tyler Bass, each and every week, it seems like he hits a 50-plus yarder or gets double-digit fantasy points. And this week, he's got another great matchup at the New York Jets that give up the third most fantasy points to kickers. So the Bills, I know last week, very tough loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars, 9-6. But Bass still finished with 6 fantasy points in his only 2 field goal attempts. So right here, Bass is on a high-powered offense. I think it was a 1-week hiccup here for the Bills, and I think they get right versus the New York Jets. And Bass has a big fantasy day. The second kicker, Justin Tucker of the Baltimore Ravens. So Justin Tucker and the Ravens have a great matchup as well here, just like Bass and the Bills do at the Miami Dolphins on Thursday Night Football. Like the second most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And Tucker, we know he's one of the best kickers in NFL history. This Raven team, they're rolling now after getting a bad taste out of their mouth, losing that 41-17 game in Week 7. They had a nice comeback victory versus the Minnesota Vikings in Week 9, where Justin Tucker had 10 fantasy points. And this week, I think he easily could get 8 to 10 fantasy points, or even above that in this one. The next kicker is Gaye of the Los Angeles Rams. So Gaye, it's been a good fantasy season for him, no doubt about it. And like I say, each and every week with him, he's a guarantee 7 to 10 fantasy points. And the last few weeks for him, Week 8 at Houston, 7. Week 9 versus Tennessee, 11 fantasy points. And this week at the San Francisco 49ers, I think we're going to see more of the same, where the Rams are going to be in the red zone. They're a high-powered offense, even though I know last week it was a bad loss and they didn't score much versus the Tennessee Titans. But this week they're going to get back on track as well, is this team. And Gaye, if they don't even score much, or even in the mid-teens, it's shown that Gaye still puts up fantasy points. Like last week, they scored only 16 points, was this Ram team, but he still had 11 fantasy points. So right here, he's a top 5 kicker each and every week. And this week, I got him in number 3. Number 4, Daniel Carlson of the Vegas Raiders. So Daniel Carlson, he's coming back with some big ball games over the last few weeks. And Carlson here last week had a good one versus the New York Giants with 8 fantasy points. And this week here, they're going to have to try to keep up with this Chief offense. I know this Chief offense has been slumping the last few games here, but Daniel Carlson and this Raider team, they're at home. It's indoors. They play better indoors. And Carlson, the last 3 weeks, Week 6 at Denver, 12 fantasy points. Week 7 versus Philly, 6. And Week 9, like I mentioned, at the Giants, 8. So right here this week, anywhere from 6 to 10 I think he could get. And this is a primetime ball game as well. And a big division matchup here on Sunday Night Football. But Carlson, he's just way better at home than he is on the road, in my opinion. And I think he has a good game this week. Number 5, Chris Boswell of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Chris Boswell, he's a good kicker over the last few weeks. And he's been a hot waiver wire add as well this week here. Added in 26% of fantasy leagues. So this week he's got the best matchup possibly that a kicker could have versus the Detroit Lions that give up the most fantasy points to kickers. And this Pittsburgh Steelers offense by no means is perfect this season, where they got to settle for a lot of field goals. And obviously that plays good for Chris Boswell. So the last few weeks for Boswell, Week 6 versus Seattle, 12 fantasy points. Week 8 at the Cleveland Browns, 3 fantasy points. And then last week versus the Chicago Bears with a game-winning field goal towards the end, he had 14 fantasy points, including 3 50-plus yarders in that one. So right here at Detroit, I think it's going to be a good game for him. The only thing is he might get a few extra points more than field goal attempts in this one if the Steelers offense comes out early and often scoring the touchdowns. But they're going to be in the red zone a whole bunch in this game versus Detroit. And I think Boswell has another good game this week. Number 6, Ryan Sucko of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Sucko, he's been up and down this season here, but he's on one of the top offenses in all pro football, no doubt about it, over here in Tampa Bay. And I think this week here versus a weak Washington football team in Washington that gives up the 8th most fantasy points to kickers, Suckup's going to have 2 or 3 opportunities in this one. Right here, Tampa Bay, they want to get back on track after a bad loss at the New Orleans Saints before going into their bye week in Week 9. And right here, Tom Terrific, he's going to get this team in field goal position. It's an easy matchup for the offense. And at minimum, I think he's going to have at least 4 extra points in this one, his Suckup. And then tack on 1 or 2 field goals as well. Number 7, Michael Badgley of the Indianapolis Colts. So Badgley, he's been a great pickup here for this Colt team over the last 4 or 5 weeks since Rodrigo Blankenship went down with injury. And Blankenship, who knows when he's coming back, but right now Badgley's been more consistent and a better kicker this season, in my opinion. Week 6, when he signed there, versus Houston, 8 fantasy points. Week 7 at the 49ers, 7. Week 8 versus Tennessee, 7 fantasy points. And Week 9 versus the Jets, 9 fantasy points. So right here, Week 10, another plus matchup for Badgley and the Colts versus a division foe in the Jacksonville Jaguars that give up the 10th most fantasy points to kickers. So right here, I'm going to go with the grain and say he gets anywhere from 7 to 9 fantasy points, because it seems like his floor is 7 fantasy points. He's going to get opportunities. He's on a pretty decent offense with good playmakers and a team that's in the red zone decently. So I think Badgley this week has another good game. Number 8, Brandon McManus of the Denver Broncos. So McManus last week versus the Dallas Cowboys got back on track with a double-digit fantasy game. And plus, he left a couple points out there as well. He missed an extra point and a 54-yarder as well in the game. But right here, he's got a good matchup versus the Philadelphia Eagles. The Broncos are back at home. You know, the Eagles, they don't really stop anyone on the defensive end of things. And right here, I think McManus and Mile High, he's good for anywhere from 7 to 9 fantasy points as well. It's a good matchup. Broncos are home. They're feeling good after a big victory versus 6-1 Cowboy team going into that game. And right here versus Philly, I think their offense can make noise in that one as well and have the opportunities for McManus in this ball game. Number 9, Matt Prater of the Arizona Cardinals. So the Cardinals last week, they didn't play with their top 2 players in Kyler Murray, obviously, and DeAndre Hopkins. Well, Prater still had a mediocre game at the Niners in Week 9 with 6 fantasy points. And this team, they put up points no matter who's at quarterback. We saw last week they put up 31 with Colt McCoy quarterback. So this week, I think they're going to be living in the red zone early and often versus the Carolina Panthers. And the Panthers have no Sam Darnold as well. So I think this Arizona offense could start in good field position most of the game with P.J. Walker starting at quarterback. And they're going to have trouble moving the ball. And that's good for Prater in the offense to have more opportunities, in my opinion, in the red zone. We know Prater's a veteran. We know he kicks deep still from 50-plus yards. And plus, it's an indoor game as well in Arizona. So this week here, I think he'll have one of his better weeks in the last few weeks here for Prater. So I have him at number 9. Number 10, Young Hoku of the Atlanta Falcons. So Young Hoku, he's a very accurate kicker and one of the best, in my opinion, in the league. But this season, the opportunities just haven't been there like they were last season, where he was top 5 in scoring at the kicking position. But the last 3 weeks, he still put up big games. Week 7 at Miami, 12. Week 8 versus the Panthers, 10. And Week 9 at the New Orleans Saints, 8 fantasy points. So right here in Week 10 at the Dallas Cowboys, they give up the 13th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And I think Young Hoku is going to get 2 or 3 opportunities for field goals and a few extra points. I know this Cowboy defense has been pretty decent in terms of stats and stuff, but teams still driving up and down the field on them. Teams are still getting in the red zone. And in my opinion, this is going to be a mini shootout with the Cowboys and the Falcons. And I think Young Hoku in this one could get anywhere from 8 to 10 fantasy points with his floor being 6. So I like him at number 10. Number 11, Harrison Butker of the Kansas City Chiefs. So this season, Harrison Butker, he just hasn't done much, and it's not all his fault as well. This Chief offense is definitely struggling this season, especially the last few weeks where they're not scoring much. Week 7, the Chiefs only scored 3 points. Week 8 versus the Giants, only 20. And then last week versus the Green Bay Packers, only 13 points. So right here, Butker, he's getting a little more opportunities with the low score in the last few weeks. Week 7 at Tennessee, 4. Week 8 versus the Giants, 8. And Week 9 versus Green Bay, 8. But right here, Week 10, it's a division matchup at the Vegas Raiders, where their defense ain't all that great. But right here, this Chief offense, like I just mentioned, is inconsistent. They're not scoring the football a lot. So Butker definitely bumps down, in my opinion. But I still think 6 to 8 fantasy points is a possibility. And it wouldn't surprise me if he gets double digits as well. We'll see what type of offense comes out and how many times they get in the red zone in this game for the Chiefs. And the 12th and final kicker I got ranked this week's Randy Bullock of the Tennessee Titans. So the Titans here, they've turned things around big time since that tough loss Week 4 at the Jets. And they've won now 5 games in a row now as this Titan team. And Randy Bullock, he's turned it around this season. After last year, he was a little bit off, but the last few weeks, he's had big fantasy games. Week 6 versus Buffalo, 11. Week 7 versus Kansas City, 11. Week 12 at the Colts, 12. Week 9 at the Rams, 4. And this week here versus the Saints, I know they give up the 10th least amount of fantasy points to kickers on the season, but I think Randy Bullock in this ball game could definitely have a good one, and it wouldn't surprise me if he reaches double-digit fantasy points for the 4th time in 5 games. So that's top 12 kickers I'm ranking here for Week 10 of the fantasy football season.